All right, welcome back to another episode of a deep dive into Find a Joy Friday. Today we're going to do a Foxtail Wedged tenon. For the wood, we're going to use the finest of walnuts and a piece of 2x4 that I found in the trash. I'm going to start this one off a little bit different. We're going to start off on the computer in Fusion 360 to make a little template block for the chisels. Because this has an angled mortise where the walls are sloped in, I just wanted something that I could reference repeatedly with the chisel and not wander off. So printed that up in the 3D printer, and it's pretty much just a plastic block with 1:8 ratio walls on each end. The way that this works in my head, at least, is that this is going to be attached to the workpiece, and then the chisel will be able to ride on the walls, just like I'm showing here, to where it has a slight outward angle, so it can make this dovetail shaped opening mortise, whatever you want to call it. I guess you'd call it a mortise. Now it's time to lay everything out on this fine piece of 2x4. The 3D printed block has a 1/2 inch opening on it, so I'm going to go ahead and mark center and then a 1/4 inch out from each side on that, so I can have a nice centered 1/2 inch opening to lay this block on top of. Now, for some reason, whenever I cut this 2x4, I didn't cut it to the same length as the block because I guess that would have just been too easy. So I measured and marked where the center would be for the block to sit, and then I marked inside of the opening on that block so that we knew exactly where we needed to drill out the holes. Because I ain't cutting all this out with the chisel. So I brought this piece over to the drill press and hogged out a majority of the material with a Forstner bit. I put a piece of tape on here just to tell me how deep I needed to go. A little tip, if you leave that little flag of tape on there, whenever you get close to how deep you need to be, that flag will start to smack those pieces that are on top away from the hole, and that'll tell you that you're close. I also use this other drill bit to clean out the rest of the material. Uh, I don't think that's how you're supposed to use drill bits though, but it worked for me. Now, last week, I used some double sided tape to keep a piece in place while I was doing some routing on it, and I really liked how that worked, so I'm using it again here to keep this piece in place while I chisel out the rest of this material. Now, if this joint doesn't make sense to you right off the bat, you're not alone. It didn't make sense to me either. I had to read it a couple times in order for it to make sense. And pretty much what it is a mortise that's blind, so it doesn't go all the way through the piece, and it flares out like a dovetail as well. So as it goes deeper, it gets wider. And then the tenon that's going to be on the walnut piece that we make later, that's going to be straight. And it has a couple relief cuts in it that wedges get driven into as you hammer it down into the mortise. So as you're hammering it down, it'll actually spread out that tenon on the walnut, and it will wedge itself into that mortise to where it won't come back out. That's the theory anyway. We're going to see how well we're able to execute this or not. So the block that I 3D printed did work really well for finishing out this mortise. One thing I would change on it though in the future is I wouldn't make it as tall. I made it 2 inches tall, and in reality 1 inch probably would have been just fine. With the mortise sorted out, I'm able to shift my focus over to this tenon, and I'm going to knock this out over on the table saw. I'm using a flat grind blade and my miter gauge with a fence so that I can establish a good shoulder on this tenon. With that shoulder established, I'm able to flip up that stop block and hog away the rest of the material to finish out this tenon. The blade I'm using is a Forest Woodworker 2, and it's a special #1 grind, which is pretty much their fancy way of saying it's a flat grind blade. But I really like it because most of the other flat grind blades that I've used have always been either a ripping blade with an aggressive cut or just low quality and they dulled really fast. So this one is a 40 tooth and is very sharp right out of the box and has been giving really good cuts, and I leave this pretty much on my saw at all times. With that tenon sorted out, we can give this guy a test fit, and if this was just a normal mortise and tenon, we'd be done right now. We could glue this guy up. But no, we had to make it fancy. So I clamped the walnut into the vise and marked out where I wanted to make those relief cuts on this tenon. It doesn't really specify in the book how far, it just says that it should be near the edge. So 3/4 of an inch in this case is near the edge. Now, if all I did was make that relief cut and I didn't drill a hole at the base of that relief cut, it would almost guarantee that that would split whenever I go to drive the wedge into it. So I brought it back over here to the drill press, and I'm drilling a couple relief holes at the base of those relief cuts. Now I know what you're thinking. Man, this guy is one fine woodworker. I know you're definitely not thinking, man, he used a dovetail saw with a really thin curve. How's he even going to get a wedge in there? And I know you're definitely not thinking, man, he really jacked up those cuts that second time around. And while your kind words are greatly appreciated in the comments, I can 100% agree with that person that didn't put that comment in there that I definitely jacked up those cuts. But you know what? No one's going to see them, right? I am making this video about them though. We'll just keep this between you and me. Deal? I'm glad we can make a deal. I always knew I could confide in you. That's why you're subscribed to my channel, right? Anyways, because there's no way to really test fit this wedge system, because once you wedge it in, it doesn't come out, I'm going to go ahead and sand everything now while I have everything nice and flat and can get to it with the random orbit sander, because I'm definitely not hand sanding this thing. I made a couple small wedges that fit into these relief cuts off camera, and now there's nothing to it but to do it. Luckily, we have the boss's dog on our side, so what could go wrong? Now, there's definitely an assembly process to this. You want to first put the wedges into the relief cuts so that they stick in just like that. And then we want to put a pretty heavy amount of glue in this thing. We're kind of leaning on faith that it's actually all going to stick together. So, really, more is better in this case. Well, with everything thoroughly coated, it's time for the money shot. I haven't met anything I couldn't hammer together, but in this case, I was a little apprehensive that it wasn't going to fit just right. I had to call in for a little bit of reinforcement with the old Bessie clamps, the best clamps. Honestly, the clamps seemed like they'd be a better option than trying to hammer this in anyway, so really it worked out. Now, I let it sit in clamps for no less than 61 minutes, and whenever I took it out, I needed to give it the pull test. Did it come together? Did it stay stuck? And it seemed to be doing pretty good. There's no real way to see, and it didn't split anything, so at face value, I would call it a success. So that means it's time for the Wood Daddy wood finish. Honestly, for a trash piece of 2x4, this thing took finish really well, and dare I say, I liked it. Of course, when Daddy's got you covered, how could you not like it? Now that we got the furniture oil applied, we're at our finished product. I guess we'll never know if those wedges actually made it all the way in there, but it did stay stuck together, so I guess we're going to call it a... Wait a sec. What are you doing in here? No, no, that's mine. Give it back. Well, I guess since Uncle Hank cut our joint in half, let's see what's inside. If you aren't subscribed already, you definitely should be. Just as I thought. They totally didn't spread out.
That's depressing, isn't it?
You can see where the wedges got driven up, but they didn't drive up enough to actually spread the wood. And I think I put them too far in. And also, the 2x4 was way too soft. You can see where it just dented in, where it should have pushed that wedge up. So, unfortunately, it's kind of a failure, but hey, that boss dog held it together anyway. So, there's always a silver lining. If you like what you've seen so far, or if you don't, we do videos like these every Friday. I don't always cut these joints in half because honestly, I don't always have to. And I promise, not all of them are failures. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and that notification bell so that you can be notified every single Friday whenever we post these videos. As always, thanks for watching.